The wind was wrong. Sun Wukong knew wind the way a fish knows water. He had ridden it across the roof of the sky, outraced it, been thrown by it, slept curled inside a thunderhead with his tail hooked around a bolt of lightning, like a child hugging a stick. He knew the dry, hot breath off the flaming mountains and the salt gale that came screaming out of the eastern sea, and the thin, holy stillness of the air outside the south gate of heaven, where the clouds were paved, and the immortals walked with their hands tucked into their sleeves and their noses in the air. He knew every wind there was to know. This one he did not know at all. He noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a song you have hummed 10,000 times. A half-breath of hesitation, a pressure against the somersault cloud that should not have been there. He had leapt from the tail end of a mountain range chasing a fox spirit that owed him a wager, 108,000 li in a single bound, the world unspooling green and gold beneath him, and somewhere in the middle of that leap the sky had hiccuped. There was no better word for it. A seam he could not see had opened just wide enough to swallow a leaping monkey, and the cloud beneath his feet had gone from something solid and obedient to something that slid sideways like wet silk off a table. "Oi!" he said, to no one, to the wind, to the seam. "Oi! That's mine! Give it back!" The cloud did not give it back. The cloud, in fact, came apart in his hands like a fistful of steam, and Sun Wukong, great sage equal to heaven, handsome monkey king, the demon queller whose name had been scratched out of the book of life and death by his own hand 900 years ago, fell out of one world and into another one, laughing. He was laughing because falling was funny. Falling had always been funny to him, ever since the first time, when he had jumped from the top of the mountain of flowers and fruit as a stone monkey barely a season old, and discovered that the ground would forgive almost anything if you hit it hard enough, and grinned wide enough afterward. He fell now through a strange gray dusk, tumbling, cackling, watching a landscape he did not recognize rush up to meet him. No flaming mountains, no green rice terraces stepping down to a river, no pagoda roofs curling their eaves at the clouds. Just a rolling dark plain under a bruise-colored sky, a scatter of cold stars coming out, and far off, very far off, at the very hem of the world, a shape that made the fur on the back of his neck stand up before his mind had even worked out why. Then the ground forgave him. It forgave him at roughly the speed of an artillery shell. Sun Wukong struck a low hill shoulder first, and the hill lost the argument. A crater opened. Dirt fountained up in a black curtain and rained back down over half a li of grassland, and a shockwave rolled outward through the dry grass and flattened it in a widening ring, and a startled flock of something with too many wings exploded off a nearby ridge and fled into the dark screaming. In the middle of the crater, a monkey sat up and spat out a mouthful of soil. "Pa." He worked his jaw. He rubbed the back of his head, where a bump he could not feel was already unforming. The diamond-hard flesh Laozi's furnace had baked into him, smoothing itself back to what it had been. Rude planet. He stood. He was not tall. Never had been. A wiry little thing barely up to a tall man's chest, all cord and sinew under a coat of golden-brown fur, with a face the color of a ripe peach, and two eyes that, when he opened them fully, glowed a molten amber gold from within, as if someone had lit a lamp behind each. Around his brow sat a thin gold circlet he had long since stopped resenting. Over one shoulder he carried a needle. It looked like a sewing needle, tucked behind his ear the way a carpenter carries a pencil. It was not a sewing needle. He looked around at the dark plain, and the wrongness he had felt in the wind settled deeper into him, into the marrow, into the old animal part of him that had survived under a mountain for 500 years by knowing exactly when to be afraid. This was not his world. He had been to a great many places. He had been dragged up to heaven twice and gate-crashed it once. He had gone down into the water palaces of the Dragon Kings and turned them upside down looking for a weapon that suited him. He had walked into hell itself, into the offices of the 10 kings of the underworld, and demanded the ledger with his name in it, and struck the name out with a borrowed brush, while the judges wept. He knew the shape of his own cosmos, the way he knew the calluses on his own palm. Heaven above, the mortal world in the middle, the seas at the edges, the courts of the dead below, and gods and demons stacked between them like the layers of a very complicated cake. This place had none of that shape. He reached out with the sense he could not name, The immortal sense, the one that felt the grain of a world the way a hand feels the grain of wood, and found the grain running the wrong way entirely. No heaven overhead that he could feel, no orderly courts, no jade emperor drowsing on his high throne, no Buddha's palm waiting to fold shut over a boastful monkey. Just this cold, dark plain, and a scatter of small mortal lives glimmering here and there like coals under ash, and that thing at the edge of the world. He turned to face it, and his fiery eyes narrowed to slits. It was too far to make out in any honest detail, a suggestion more than a sight, a low broad hill or a mound or a barrow squatting on the horizon. But power came off it the way heat comes off a forge, even at this distance, even across all these empty lies. And it was a kind of power the Monkey King had never tasted before. It was not the clean, cold radiance of heaven. It was not the wet, green hunger of a demon warren. It was something made, something built and stacked and layered by many hands into a single vast intention, and death was woven all through it. Not the busy, honest death of the underworld's ledgers, but a still and patient death that had learned to walk around and give orders. It sat there on the horizon like a spider at the center of a web too big to see, and the whole of this strange world seemed to lean very slightly toward it, the way a room full of frightened people leans away from the one man holding a knife. Sun Wukong grinned, and there was nothing kind in it. "Well," he said softly, "to the mound, to the death, to the whole wrong-grained world, you look like trouble." He had spent 900 years learning, very slowly and against every instinct in his stubborn skull, that not every powerful thing needed a beating. But the learning had never taken all the way down, somewhere below the lessons, below the sutras and the pilgrimage, and the long apprenticeship in humility. There was still a stone monkey who had looked up at the gates of heaven itself and thought, "I could take that." That monkey stirred now, and cracked his knuckles, and looked at the thing on the horizon with frank professional interest. Later, he told himself, with the air of a man promising himself a second cup of wine, "You've only just got here. Have a look around first. Be polite." Ha! He turned his back on the mound, deliberately, insolently, the way he had once turned his back on the Jade Emperor's whole assembled court, and set off walking across the flattened grass toward the nearest of those small, glimmering mortal lives. Walking, not flying. His cloud was scattered and would take a moment to whistle back to him, and besides, a monkey who has just fallen out of the sky into a strange land should have the manners to arrive on his own 2 feet. The first mortals he found were dead. He came over a low rise, and there they were, 6 of them, sprawled in and around the ruin of a merchant's wagon at the bottom of a dry gully. A rough road ran through it, 2 ruts worn into the earth, and the wagon had been overturned across the ruts and picked clean. Ordinary folk, by their clothes, traders. A woman with gray in her hair still had one hand knotted in the reins of an ox that was also dead. They had not been dead long. The blood had gone tacky, but not yet dry, and the crows had not found them, and the cold had not fully taken the last of the warmth from them. Sun Wukong crouched over the woman with the reins in her fist and went very still. He had a temper the way a summer sky has thunder, sudden, total, and gone as fast as it came. But under the temper, older than the temper, was the thing that had made him worth redeeming in the first place. He did not like to see the small ones hurt. He never had. Half of everything he had ever done, he had done because some village had a demon eating its children, or some road had a bandit spirit taking travelers, and the little people had nowhere else to turn, and a loud, stupid monkey with an iron stick had decided he cared. He looked at the gray-haired woman's face, slack now, and at the way she had died still trying to hold on to her ox, and something behind his ribs went cold and quiet. "Who did this to you, Auntie?" he murmured. It was not really a question. The dead do not answer, not in any world, but the ground answered, a little. He read the story in the churned dirt the way any tracker reads a trail, and it told him, many feet, booted, marching in something like order, not beasts, men who had done this the way men clear a table, casually, thoroughly, without heat, because the wagon was in their way, and its owners were beneath their notice. This world has masters, he thought, and the masters are cruel. He was still crouched there, turning that thought over, when he became aware that he was being watched. He did not move. He let his ears do the work, and his ears were very good, monkey sharp, able to catch a whisper across a valley. There, a scrape of breath, held too tight, a heartbeat going far too fast, small, low to the ground, behind the broken axle of the wagon, folded into the shadow where a child folds when a child is trying with its whole body not to exist. Ah, thought the Monkey King, and every hard edge in him softened at once. Now, before we go on, and before this monkey does the gentle thing he is about to do, a small word from the one telling you this tale. This is a story of what would happen if the great sage equal to heaven fell out of his sky and into the cold world that Nazarick rules. And it was Dust Sands who wanted to see it, who named the universe and named the character and set this monkey falling. It's written by me, and I'll keep writing them for as long as you keep watching. So if there's a world you want to see cracked open and a face you want to see walk into it, put the two together and say so, and hit that subscribe button on your way past. Some pairings, the moment I hear them, I think, oh, that one's going to be fun. This was one of those. Now, back to the monkey and the child behind the wagon. Sun Wukong did not turn around fast. He did not want to frighten it worse than it was already frightened. He settled back on his heels and folded his hands in his lap and looked up at the coming out stars. And he spoke to the air in a voice gone gentle and easy, the voice he used on skittish things. "You can come out, you know," he said. "I'm not one of the ones who did this. Look at me. Do I look like one of them?" He spread his arms, showing off the coat of golden fur, the peach-colored face, the ridiculous grinning monkey of himself. "I'm the wrong shape entirely. I couldn't march in a straight line if you paid me. I'm no soldier." Silence. But the too fast heartbeat stumbled, caught, listened. "I'll tell you a secret," Wukong went on, conversational, gazing at the stars. "I fell out of the sky. Just now. Big hole in that hill over there, that's me. You can go and look after. I was chasing a fox that owes me money, and I missed, and the sky dropped me here like a bad houseguest." He clucked his tongue. "So I'm having a very strange night, and I expect you're having a much worse one. And I thought, if the two of us are going to have a rotten night anyway, we might as well have it together. Warmer that way. Safer too. I'm quite good at safe. Ask anyone." Well, he considered. Ask anyone who's still alive. A very long pause. Then, from behind the broken axle, a small, dirty face. A boy, 7 or 8, eyes swollen from crying and now stretched wide with a terror that was slowly being overtaken by the deeper and more dangerous thing that children feel when an adult speaks to them kindly in the dark. Hope. The boy looked at the monkey looked at the boy. "You are a monkey," the boy whispered, as if this were the most impossible thing about the entire night. Which, given the entire night, was saying something. "I am the finest monkey," Sun Wukong agreed, with enormous dignity. The original article, except no imitations. He beckoned, slow and easy. "Come here, little one. Come out of the cold. Nobody's going to touch you while I'm sitting here. I promise you that, on a very old and very stubborn name." The boy came out. He came out the way a wounded animal comes to an outstretched hand, in fits, ready to bolt. And then all at once, in a rush, and he collided with the small warm bulk of the Monkey King, and clung there and shook. And Sun Wukong wrapped one wiry arm around him, and made a low soothing sound in his chest, and glared over the boy's head at the dark plain, at the churned marching tracks, at the far mound squatting on the horizon with its patient walking death. "There now," he murmured. "There, you're all right. Old monkey's got you." And then, because he was who he was, and because the tenderness and the fury lived in him side by side, and always had, he added, very quietly, in a voice the boy was too busy weeping to hear, a voice pitched at the horizon, at the makers of marching tracks, at whatever cold king kept his death on a leash out there at the edge of the world. "And whoever did this, whoever taught this whole world to be so afraid," his fiery eyes flared, twin coals in the dark, and for just a moment the grinning trickster was entirely gone, and something far, far older looked out through them, something that had once torn the pillars of heaven's gate off their hinges. "You and I are going to have a conversation. Somewhere far away, deep beneath a hill that should not exist in this world, in a throne room of black stone and gold, a skeletal hand paused halfway through a gesture. Something had entered the world, something the instruments could not name. The instruments of the Great Tomb of Nazarick were the finest that 100 obsessive minds across a decade of a dead game had ever devised, refined again in the months since the world changed by beings who no longer slept, no longer tired, and no longer had anything to do with their immortality except serve. Divination pools that could show a scrying image of any point their master had walked. Mirrors of remote viewing. The vast, layered wards that lay over Nazarick like the coats of an onion, each one a tripwire strung between this world and the powers that might come for the tomb. Nothing crossed the horizon of Nazarick's awareness without something, somewhere, chiming. At the 9th hour of the evening, everything chimed at once. In the throne room on the 10th floor, the deepest, holiest chamber, where the world's most beautiful throne of black crystal and beaten gold stood beneath 41 banners for 41 departed gods, Ainz Ooal Gown sat with his skeletal chin on his skeletal fist and thought about how tired he was of pretending to know things. He did not, of course, look tired. He could not look tired. He had no face to look tired with. He was a towering thing of clean dark bone and cold red points of light where eyes should be, robed in black and violet stitched with gold, crowned, wreathed in a low permanent flicker of dark energy that made the air around him feel like the inside of a tomb, because it was the inside of a tomb, in every sense. When he moved, the motion had the slow, deliberate grace of something that had all the time in the world. When he was still, as now, he was as still as a statue on a sarcophagus. He looked, to the being kneeling before him, like a god. Inside the god, a 30-something salaryman named Suzuki Satoru, who had once lived in a cramped apartment and eaten cheap noodles alone and played this game because it was the only place anyone had ever waited for him. That man was, at this exact moment, thinking, "Please let this be a small problem. Please, for once, let something be a small problem." "Lord Ainz," said Albedo. She knelt at the base of the dais, and even kneeling she was magnificent. The overseer of the floor guardians, jet-black wings folded, golden eyes lifted to him with an adoration so total, it made him deeply uncomfortable, in a way he had long since given up trying to fix. He had, in a fit of idiot boredom during those first hours in the new world, edited her settings, changed one line. She is deeply in love with Ainz. He had thought it a private joke with a dead friend. He had been paying for it ever since. "Yes, Albedo, report." He kept his voice low, resonant, unhurried. The trick, he had learned, was to say as little as possible, and to say it slowly, so that the silence around the words filled up with meaning he had never put there. "The outer wards have registered an anomaly." She did not rise. 40 lie, to the northeast, on the Katsa grasslands, at the 9th hour precisely. A disturbance of the 6th magnitude, and here, for the first time in months, Ainz heard something in Albedo's flawless voice that he had never heard there before, a thing so small that only he, listening from behind the god mask, would have caught it. A hairline crack. "No, forgive me, my lord. The instruments could not settle on a magnitude." That is the anomaly. The red points of Ainz's eyes did not change, because they could not. But behind them, Suzuki Satoru went very quiet and very careful, the way a man goes quiet when he hears an unfamiliar sound in his house in the middle of the night. "Explain that," he said. Movement, to the side of the dais. Demiurge had risen from where he too had knelt, the guardian of the 7th floor, the demon, the architect, the one Ainz feared the most of all his terrifyingly loyal children, and feared precisely because Demiurge was the only one who might, given enough rope, outthink him, and never realize he'd done it. Demiurge was slender and elegant and eternally, pleasantly smiling, in a fine gray suit, his eyes hidden behind small glinting spectacles that showed only 2 points of light of their own, when he turned his head just so. He steepled his clawed fingers. "If I may, Lord Ainz." A tilt of the head, permission granted with a small tilt of the crown. The wards do not merely detect power, they classify it. Every force that has approached us since our arrival in this world, every adventurer, every beast, every angel of the slain theocracy, every native so-called god, has, in the end, resolved onto the scale. We read them in the terms we understand, levels, tiers, Yggdrasil's grammar. His smile widened by a precise, unsettling degree. This did not resolve. Meaning what? Said Ainz, and was pleased that it came out flat and dangerous instead of meaning what. Oh no, please. What? Meaning, my lord, that the disturbance possesses a power signature of considerable magnitude. The shockwave alone flattened grassland for a li in every direction. We have the scrying, and yet the instruments cannot assign it a level, a tier, or a school. Demiurge's tail moved slowly behind him, a metronome of pure pleasure. It is not that the reading was too high to measure. We have measured high things. It is that the reading does not fit the ruler. It is as though one attempted to weigh a color, or to measure the length of a piece of music. The instrument is not overwhelmed, it is baffled. And there it was, the cold. It came up through the floor of Ainz Ooal Gown, through the black crystal of the throne, into the hollow architecture of his bones. His undead physiology could not sweat, could not shiver, could not let his heart pound because he had no heart to pound. And Suzuki Satoru had learned, in these last months, that this was a mercy and a curse both, because the fear had nowhere to go. It just sat inside him, undischarged, while the god mask stared serenely down, because he knew what a thing off the ruler might be. A player, whispered the hope, the great hope, the thing he had wanted so badly since the first hour that he had nearly wept his non-existent tears. Another human being from his own world, flung into this one as he had been. Another person who remembered noodles and trains and the game and the friends. He was so lonely. He was a god now, and he was the loneliest he had ever been in his entire life, surrounded by beings who loved him past all reason, and not one of whom he could truly talk to, and some pathetic ember at the center of him still lit up like a child's lantern at the mere possibility of someone else. A player, whispered the dread, the older, colder thing, the thing that had kept Nazarick alive, another human being from his own world, which meant another human being who might have another Nazarick, another set of world-shattering powers, another arsenal of world items, another divine class build, tuned to exactly the weaknesses of a build like his. He had spent his whole tenure here terrified of exactly this. A player was the one thing in all creation that could actually end him, and now something had fallen out of the sky that his instruments could not name, and it was 40 li away, and it had flattened a li of grassland with its arrival like a dropped mountain. Say something, he told himself. Say something wise. They're all looking at you. They were. Albedo, kneeling, adoring. Demiurge, smiling, waiting to be dazzled. And now the others too, as the summons went out and the throne room filled. Cocytus, the great insectoid warrior, frost pluming from his mandibles as he took his place with a warrior's stillness. The twins Aura and Mare arriving in a tumble of dark elf energy and shy fidgeting. Shaltir, the little vampire, gliding in with her dead doll grace and her red hunger. Sabus, the dragonoid butler, bowing with a servant's perfect economy. His children, his terrible, magnificent, murderously devoted children, all of them turned toward the throne, all of them waiting to hear what their god made of the thing that had entered his world. Ainz let the silence stretch. He had learned to weaponize silence. He counted 3 slow beats behind the mask, and used them to think, hard and fast, the way the salaryman had once thought his way through a crisis, at a job that had not loved him half so much as these monsters did. Options. What do I actually know? Something powerful. Something I can't classify. That's it. That's all I've got. If I overreact, send out the Guardians, launch Nazarick's full might at it, and it turns out to be a player who wanted to be friends, I've made an enemy that could kill us all, and I've thrown away the thing I want most in the world. If I underreact, do nothing, wave it off, and it turns out to be a player who wants us dead, or worse than a player, I've handed it 40 li, and all the time in the world to prepare, and these idiots will follow whatever I decide, as if I've read it in the stars. So, don't decide, observe, send an eye, not a fist, and whatever you say it so they think you already know everything. He lifted one skeletal hand, the whole room drew breath. An entertaining puzzle, said Ainz Ooal Gown. He was rather proud of entertaining. It came out exactly right. Bored, vast, a god flicking a curiosity between 2 fingers. He watched the words land, watched the flicker of relief, that was almost worship, pass across the assembled faces, and he thought, with the weary private despair that was his constant companion now, They think I have a plan. I have no plan. I have never once, in this entire world, had a plan. I have only ever been terrified and lucky. My lord is amused, breathed Demiurge, and his spectacles caught the light, and Ainz's non-existent stomach dropped, because he knew that tone. That was the tone of a mind about to build a cathedral on a foundation of one careless word. Of course, he is not troubled by the unreadable, because the unreadable is precisely. Demiurge stopped himself, visibly, with the air of a man declining to spoil his master's surprise. Forgive me. I will not presume to trace the full shape of your design aloud, Lord Ainz. I see only its edges, and even its edges are breathtaking. I don't have a design, Ainz did not scream. There is no design. There is a monkey-shaped hole in a hill 40 li away, and I am making this up as I go. The same as I have made up literally everything since we got here. Please, Demiurge, I am begging you, stop building. See that you don't presume, he said, instead, which was, he had discovered, a phrase that could mean absolutely anything and always sounded profound. Albedo lifted her head. My lord, command us. Shall I go? I will bring you the thing's head, or bring you the thing in chains, whichever pleases you. It looked upon nothing yet. It does not even know Nazarick exists, and I would keep it that way until you wish otherwise. Her golden eyes blazed. Say the word, and the Katsa grasslands will be a grave. And there was the other danger, Ainz thought. Not the thing on the plain. This. The overwhelming, over-eager love of beings who would set fire to a whole nation on a syllable from him and call it a gift. He had to be so careful with them. A raised voice, a careless do something about it, and Albedo would go and reduce a stranger, and everyone within 100 li of that stranger, to ash, and present the ash to him as a bouquet. No, he said, and let it fall heavy and final. No one goes to it, not yet. The disappointment in the room was a physical weight. He rode over it. Consider, he said, and rose from the throne, and 41 banners stirred as the dark energy around him swelled. The god, performing godhood, a thing that cannot be measured, has arrived at the edge of my domain. It has not approached us. It does not, as Albedo notes, appear to know we are here. It fell. He let that word sit. It fell. Even he did not know if that meant anything, but they leaned toward it as if it were scripture. We will not go and kick it to see if it bites. We are not children. We will watch it. We will learn what it is, what it wants, what it fears, and whether it walks toward us or away, before we decide whether it is a treasure to be gathered. He inclined his crowned head, just slightly, and let the ember of hope color the word despite himself, or a threat to be removed. He turned the red lamps of his eyes on Demiurge. Set the eyes on it, every scrying tool we have. I want to know everything it does, but from a distance, nothing approaches it. Nothing announces us. If it is what I suspect it may be, and he let that hang too, monstrous and hollow and meaning nothing, then the worst mistake we could make is to be the first to blink. He paused. Demiurge, you have the watch. Demiurge bowed so low his forehead nearly brushed the floor, and when he rose his smile had become a thing of terrible joy. It will be done exactly, Lord Ainz. Not a grain of sand will move around it unseen. His voice dropped, reverent, delighted, catastrophically wrong. And I will study your design as it unfolds, to watch rather than to strike, to let the unknowable reveal itself while we remain the one hidden variable it cannot account for. He shivered with pleasure. It is masterful, my lord. As always, you are 10 moves ahead of a game the rest of us have only just been told is being played. I don't even know the rules, thought Suzuki Satoru, standing inside his god, staring out at the room full of monsters who would die for him, watching Demiurge polish a thoughtless improvisation into a masterstroke, feeling the cold sit undischarged in his hollow bones. I don't know what fell on my grassland. I don't know if it's a friend I've wanted for months or the death of everything I have left. I don't know anything. Just so, said Ainz Ooal Gown, and sat back down upon his throne like judgment itself. 40 li to the northeast, in the dark, a small warm creature was murmuring comfort to a frightened child, and promising, in a voice too low for any scrying tool to catch, to have a conversation with whoever ruled this world. Neither of them yet knew the other's name. Both of them were about to. By morning, the boy had a name, and son Wukong had a plan, and both of these things had come to him in the same slow, patient hour before dawn, sitting with his back against the overturned wagon, and the child asleep against his side. The boy was called Toma. He had gathered that much in fragments through the night, between the crying and the exhausted silences, that Toma had been traveling with his grandmother and 4 others of their village, carrying dried fish and cured hides to trade in a town whose name meant nothing to the Monkey King, and that soldiers in white and gold had come down the road at dusk. Not bandits, soldiers. Toma had said the word with a specific terror, and had described, in the flat, disbelieving way of a child recounting the unthinkable, how the men in white had not even seemed angry. They had simply looked at the little caravan of villagers the way a farmer looks at weeds in a path, and then they had cleared the path, and then they had walked on, discussing among themselves something about a heretic hunt to the south, and the will of the 6 great gods. Son Wukong had committed those words to memory. The 6 great gods, the theocracy, soldiers in white and gold who kill grandmothers, because grandmothers are in the way. He filed them beside the far dark mound, and its patient death, and he began, slowly, to assemble a picture of this world. It was not a picture he liked. He had walked a hard road once, 10,000 li and 14 years of it, guarding a soft, foolish holy man on a pilgrimage west, and along that road he had learned the single most important thing he knew, which was this: the measure of a world is how it treats the ones who cannot protect themselves. By that measure his own cosmos had often failed. Heaven was corrupt, and the demons were hungry, and the mortals suffered no end. But there had always been a floor under the failing. There had been a Buddha at the top of it all who cared, in his vast, infuriating, serene way, whether the small ones lived or died. There had been justice, slow and imperfect and real. He reached out again now, in the gray before dawn, feeling for that floor in this new world. He could not find it. There was power here in abundance. The mound in the northeast, the white soldiers of the 6 gods, no doubt 100 other holds and thrones and hungry things he had not yet met. But above all of it, over all of it, there was only more power, bigger fish and smaller fish, and no sky over any of them, no Buddha's palm, no one who cared whether Toma's grandmother lived, and no one who would ever be made to answer for the fact that she had died with the reins still in her fist. A world with no heaven, thought the Monkey King, and it was the loneliest thought he had ever had. No wonder it leans toward the death on the hill. When there's nothing above you at all, you'll worship the biggest thing on the ground. He looked down at Toma, asleep, snot-crusted, one small fist knotted in the fur of the Monkey King's coat, exactly the way his grandmother's had been knotted in the ox's reins. Well, he thought, every world I've ever been in needed a monkey to make trouble in it. Suppose this one's no different. He would get the boy home, that first. Toma had described the way well enough. Back east, toward a river, a half-day's walk. Then he would find the biggest thing on the ground, and he would look it in the eye, and he would take its measure, and he would decide whether this world's death on a hill needed a beating, or merely a very stern talking to. And if it turned out that the biggest thing on the ground was the same thing that taught white soldiers to clear grandmothers off roads without anger, then the beating and the talking to could happen at the same time. He woke the boy gently. He conjured, from a plucked hair and a puff of breath, a peach. Not a peach of immortality. He wasn't a fool. Just an ordinary, sweet, honest peach, the kind he could make by the cartload, and watch the child eat it with the desperate focus of the recently starved. And then he set the boy on his shoulders, and whistled up his somersault cloud, which came at last, sheepish and reassembled, and he stepped up onto it and rose into the dawn. Toma screamed. Then Toma laughed. Then Toma, 7 years old and orphaned 12 hours ago and now flying east over a golden morning, on the shoulders of a monkey who had fallen from the sky, laughed and laughed and laughed, and Sun Wukong felt the cold, quiet thing behind his ribs ease by a fraction, and thought that whatever else this world was, it was not yet past saving. Nothing was past saving while a child could still laugh like that. He did not know that he was watched, 40 li away, in a scrying chamber lit by the cold blue light of a dozen remote mirrors. Demiurge watched the monkey fly, and became, quietly, entirely certain that he was watching a god. He had watched all night. He had watched the thing fall and stand and shake off a shoulder-first impact that would have cratered an adamantite golem, its flesh undenting itself as it rose. He had watched it find the dead villagers, and here Demiurge had leaned closer, fascinated, and he had watched it grieve over them, watched it crouch over a dead peasant woman and go still, and speak to her, and read the tracks in the earth, and lift its burning golden eyes to the horizon in the exact direction of Nazarick, with an expression Demiurge had catalogued instantly, and filed with a connoisseur's delight, challenge. Watched it coax a hidden child out of the wreckage with a patience Demiurge found deeply, professionally interesting, because Demiurge understood cruelty as an art, and he understood strategic kindness as a rarer and more sophisticated art, and he could not, watching, decide which he was seeing. And now he watched it make a peach out of nothing, and carry a laughing child east on a cloud, and he assembled from all of this a theory, and the theory was beautiful, and the theory was completely wrong, and it was wrong in precisely the way that Ainz Ooal Gown had taught Demiurge, without ever intending to always be wrong. Demiurge reasoned thus. The being was of immeasurable power, that was established. It had arrived by no ward, no gate, no spell any of them could trace. Established. It had immediately, upon arrival, done three things: assessed the region, made lethal note of Nazarick's position, and then, rather than approach, it had adopted a survivor of a theocracy atrocity and begun escorting that survivor home. To Demiurge, who had spent months learning to read the mind of his master by treating every one of Ainz's baffled improvisations as the visible tip of a submerged genius, the conclusion was inescapable. This was not a random arrival. This was an agent. A being of tremendous power had entered the region and immediately begun to gather a specific human, a witness, a piece, a thread, from among the theocracy's victims, and to move that thread toward some destination, with a cloud, with disguised kindness, with a false face of the harmless and the whimsical. It was doing, in miniature, exactly what Nazarick did. It was running an operation, and it had marked Nazarick's location with a look of challenge, because it knew, of course it knew, that only one power in this world operated at that level, and it was measuring itself against the peer it had recognized. Which means, Demiurge concluded, his tail lashing with slow ecstasy, that Lord Ainz already knows what this is. He said it would reveal itself if we watched. And it is revealing itself. It is another architect, a rival, or a test. And Lord Ainz, in his infinite foresight, told us not to strike, because to strike a fellow architect before understanding its design would be to lose the greater game entirely. He was so pleased with this that he composed the report to Ainz 3 separate times in his head, refining it, before he was satisfied. When the report came, Ainz Ooal Gown listened to it on his throne, with the mounting internal horror of a man watching someone confidently read a map upside down, and set off, whistling, toward a cliff. An agent, he repeated. Its methods mirror our own to an uncanny degree, my lord, said Demiurge, radiant. The false harmless exterior, the whimsical form, a monkey, a jester's shape, chosen surely to be underestimated. Precisely as you have counseled us, that the most dangerous player wears the least threatening mask. Its immediate cultivation of a human asset from among the theocracy's discards. Its recognition of Nazarick's position as the only power worthy of its measure. Demiurge's spectacles gleamed. It is running a long game, Lord Ainz, as are we. The only question your design leaves open is whether it is a rival to be broken, a peer to be treated with, or a piece you have already, somehow, set in motion toward an end the rest of us cannot yet see. Inside the god, Suzuki Satoru put his metaphorical head in his metaphorical hands. It's a monkey, he thought. Demiurge, my brilliant, beautiful, catastrophic son. It is a monkey that fell out of the sky and is taking a lost child home because it felt sorry for him. That is the entire operation. There is no long game. It made the boy a peach, but he could not say that, because he did not in fact know it. That was the trap of the whole thing, the trap he lived inside every single day. Demiurge's theory was insane, and Demiurge's theory was also not impossible, and Ainz had precisely as much evidence for it's a monkey with a good heart, as he had for it's an unfathomable rival architect running a mirror image of my own strategy, which was to say, none. He had a scrying image of a monkey being kind to a child. Kindness could be real. Kindness could also be exactly the mask he himself wore when he walked the world as the noble adventurer Momon. He, of all beings, could not afford to assume that a kind face meant a kind heart. He had built a career in this world on the opposite assumption. And that, he realized with a slow, sinking dread, is why I can't dismiss it. Because if I'm wrong, if it really is a rival wearing kindness the way I wear Momon, then dismissing it as harmless is exactly the mistake it would want me to make. The unmeasurable thing had power he couldn't gauge, and a nature he couldn't read, and every interpretation of it was equally plausible and equally deadly, and he was going to have to do something, and whatever he did, Demiurge would build a cathedral on it. He made a decision. It was, like all his decisions, mostly a way of buying time, but he dressed it as strategy, because that was the only language his court spoke. "You see it clearly, Demiurge," he said, which committed him to nothing and thrilled the demon to his marrow. But watching from mirrors will only tell us so much about a mind that mirrors our own. A true measure requires proximity. He steepled his skeletal fingers, and behind the mask, Suzuki Satoru braced himself for the sheer terror of what he was about to volunteer for. Some things must be assessed face to face, by an equal, quietly, with no banner and no army, so that we learn what it is before it learns what we are. Albedo went rigid with alarm. "My lord, you cannot mean to expose yourself to—" "I mean," said Ainz, "to go and look at it. As Momon, a wandering adventurer, one of 1,000 on these roads, who happens across a monkey and a boy and falls into conversation, as travelers do, and who runs away very fast the instant it does anything I don't like," he did not add. "It has not seen Nazarick. It will not see Nazarick. It will see a man on a road, and I will see, up close, what my instruments could not, whether the thing behind those eyes is a treasure, a rival, or an executioner." He rose, and the banners stirred, and the god was terrible and certain and completely improvising. "Prepare the Momon guys. I ride at once." Alone, the guardians erupted in devoted protest, and he overrode them with a raised hand and a silence weaponized to perfection, and all the while the salaryman inside the skeleton was thinking, with the grim gallows humor that was the only thing keeping him sane in this world, "I am going to walk up to an unkillable thing that flattened a lea of grassland, that grieves over dead peasants and makes peaches out of air, and looked at my house with murder in its eyes. And I am going to try to make small talk, because the alternative is admitting to my children that I have no idea what's going on. This is fine. This is completely fine." Two gods were moving toward each other across the Katsa grasslands now, one on a cloud with a laughing child on his shoulders, one in the borrowed black armor of a nameless hero, each certain the other was the great mystery of this world. Only one of them had eyes that could see through any disguise ever made. Toma's village sat in a green fold of land above a slow brown river, and it was still there, and Sun Wukong had not realized how much he'd feared it wouldn't be, until the cloud came over the last rise, and he saw smoke rising from cook fires instead of ruins. He sat down at the tree line so as not to frighten anyone. A monkey on a cloud is a great deal to spring on a village before breakfast, and walked the boy in on foot. What followed was the part of the road he had always secretly loved best, under all his bluster, the part he would never admit to loving, the reunion, a woman's scream that turned halfway through from grief into disbelief, into a joy so violent it knocked her to her knees. Toma torn off the Monkey King's shoulders and crushed into a dozen arms at once, an old man weeping openly into his beard, the whole village boiling out of their houses to see the miracle, and then, catching sight of what had brought the miracle, going very still and very quiet and very afraid. Sun Wukong was used to that too. He held up both empty hands and grinned his most disarming grin, which on a peach-faced monkey with molten eyes was only fractionally disarming, and he said, "Peace, peace, I only came to bring the little one home." He walked a hard road, and he was very brave the whole way, braver than most grown men I've known. And now he's home, and I'll be off, and you can all go back to being sensibly terrified of the sky. He winked at Toma. "Grow up strong, little general. Give the demons of this world something to worry about." He would have left it there. He genuinely would have. But the villagers, Once they understood, haltingly, that the monkey had saved their child and asked nothing, did what frightened, grateful people have always done, which was to try to feed him, and press small, poor gifts on him, and above all, to tell him things. And son Wukong, who wanted very badly to understand this world, sat down among them and let them talk, and drank the rough beer they gave him, and listened. He learned a great deal in that hour. He learned the shape of the nearby powers, the kingdom to the west, the empire to the east, and above all the theocracy of the 6 great gods to the south, whose white and gold soldiers had killed Toma's grandmother, and whose faith held that only humanity was truly people, and everything else was vermin to be scoured. He learned the word adventurer and the metal ranks that sorted them. He learned that the dead walked in the wilds, and that monsters ruled the wilds, and that a peasant's life was a small, brief thing lived in the narrow, safe spaces between larger hungers. And he learned, from an old man who lowered his voice and glanced at the sky as if it might be listening, which, 40 li away, it was, that in recent months a new power had appeared, a rumor, a kingdom that hadn't existed a year ago, ruled from somewhere northeast, out on the death grasslands where nothing grew, a sorcerer, an undead thing that called itself a king. The old man knew almost nothing real about it, nobody did, only that the few who had angered it were not merely dead but unmade, and that even the great powers had begun, very carefully, to pretend it did not exist while watching it out of the corners of their eyes. Northeast, thought Sun Wukong, and did not need to ask more. The mound, the patient death, of course it calls itself a king. They always do. He rose and thanked them, and shrugged off the gifts he couldn't in conscience take from people who had so little, and stepped out of the village into the long grass of the afternoon with his mind made up. He would go and meet this undead king. Not to fight it, not yet, not without knowing, but to look at it, the way he looked at everything, with the eyes that had been burned open in Laozi's furnace and could not be lied to. He would find out whether the biggest thing on the ground in this heavenless world was a devil that needed felling, or merely another lonely tyrant who'd mistaken fear for love. He got perhaps a li from the village before he found a man standing in the road waiting for him, and knew at once, the way he always knew, that the man was not a man at all. The figure in the road wore the black and red armor of a high adventurer, full plate, a great sword across his back, his face hidden behind a helm with a visor of dark glass. He stood with the easy balance of a warrior and the still patience of something that did not need to breathe, and he lifted one gauntleted hand in the universal gesture of peace, I mean no harm, and said, in a warm, resonant human voice, "Well met, traveler. Strange to find another wanderer this far out on the Katsa plains. They say only the desperate and the dangerous come this way." A friendly tilt of the helm. "You look like neither, merely a man of unusual company." A glance back toward the village, toward the cloud faintly visible at the tree line. "They call me Momon. I hunt the undead that plague these grasslands. And you?" It was, Suzuki Satoru thought from inside the armor, a very good opening. He had rehearsed it. Casual, plausible, an adventurer's professional courtesy, an invitation to talk that committed to nothing. He was rather proud of it. His heart, had he possessed one, would have been slamming. Instead, the fear sat in him cold and still, as he waited to see what the unmeasurable thing would do with a friendly greeting. The monkey stopped a few paces off, and cocked his head, and looked at Momon. And Ainz Ooal Gown felt the look go through him. It was not like being scryed. He knew what scrying felt like, the faint pressure of a distant eye. This was nothing distant. The monkey's eyes, molten, golden, lamplit from within, settled on the black visor of the Momon helm, and did not stop there. They went past the visor, past the illusion woven over it, past the borrowed human handsomeness of the Momon face beneath, past the armor, past the flesh that was not flesh, all the way down to the clean dark bone and the 2 cold red points of light, all the way down to the hollow-crowned skeleton wearing a hero like a coat, and then further, impossibly further, past even that, to the small, tired, frightened human thing curled up inside the god wearing the skeleton wearing the hero, and the monkey's face changed. It did not change to fear, that was the part that undid him. Every being in this world, upon glimpsing what he truly was, had shown fear or awe, or the blank slack terror of the doomed. The monkey showed none of it. The monkey's grin faded, and something like surprise crossed the peach-colored face, and then, worst of all, most impossibly of all, something like sympathy. "Huh," said Sun Wukong. He walked closer. Ainz did not retreat, though every instinct screamed at him to, because retreating would have told the thing everything. The monkey came right up to him, tilted his head the other way, and studied the black helm with the frank curiosity of a child examining an interesting bug. And then he said, in a voice pitched low and just between the two of them, kind and dreadfully knowing, "You picked a very big shell to hide in, little one." The cold in Ainz's bones became something without a name. Little one. No one, since the world had changed, had called Ainz Ooal Gown little. He was terror incarnate. He was death that walked and gave orders. Kings paled at his name. And this creature, this thing off the ruler, had looked straight through the greatest disguise magic Nazarick possessed, and seen the salaryman crouched at the bottom of it all, and had responded not with a challenge, not with an attack, but with the amused, gentle, unbearably tender voice a person uses on a small animal that has puffed itself up to look big. Momon's warm voice, when it came, was admirably steady. Suzuki Satoru would be proud of that later. "I'm not sure I take your meaning, friend." "No, you're taking it fine." Sun Wukong stepped back and folded his arms and looked the whole armored figure up and down, and now the grin came back. But it was a different grin, not mockery, something warmer and more terrible. The grin of one lonely, powerful thing recognizing another across a great distance. "These eyes of mine were baked open in a furnace by a very annoyed old man a long time ago. Every disguise in creation, every illusion, every glamour and false face and borrowed skin. I see through all of it. Always have. Can't turn it off. Believe me, I've tried. It's ruined more than one surprise party." He tapped the skin beside one molten eye. "So you can keep the shell. Doesn't bother me. Handsome shell. Good work. But I'll be talking to the fellow inside it, if it's all the same to you, the one doing all the being afraid." His voice gentled again, and it was almost unbearable, the gentleness. "You're very frightened, aren't you? Under all that. Have been for a long while, I think. All that death you've got, and you're wearing it like a suit of armor 3 sizes too big, hoping nobody notices the little scared thing rattling around inside." Inside the god, inside the skeleton, inside the armor, Suzuki Satoru went completely, silently to pieces. Because it was true. Because no one had ever said it. Because for months he had stood on that black throne being worshipped as an omniscient god by beings who would die for him, and not one of them had ever once seen that he was terrified, that he was lost, that he was a tired, lonely man improvising an apocalypse one day at a time and praying nobody found out. And now a monkey he'd met 90 seconds ago had looked at him for the length of a heartbeat and read the whole of it aloud in a kind voice on a road in the middle of nowhere. And the sheer relief of being seen was so enormous and so dangerous that for one full second, Ainz Ooal Gown, ruler of Nazarick, wanted nothing in the world so much as to sit down in the grass and tell this stranger everything. He crushed it. He crushed it the way he crushed everything soft in himself now, ruthlessly. Because softness was how gods got killed. But it took him a moment. It took him a moment he could not afford, and he knew, even as he clawed back his composure, that the monkey had seen the moment too, had watched the god flinch toward honesty, and then wrench itself back behind the mask, and had understood exactly what it meant. "So," said Sun Wukong, into that ringing silence, and he sat down cross-legged in the road, as if settling in for a long, pleasant chat, and patted the grass beside him in invitation. "Undead king of the Death Hill, that's you, isn't it? The one this whole sad world tiptoes around." He smiled up at the towering black-armored figure, and his molten eyes held no fear at all, only a bottomless, ancient, patient interest. "I've met a lot of gods, little one, fought most of them, beat a fair few. I even climbed all the way up to the top of the tallest one there was, once, absolutely certain I could take him. And I got put under a mountain for 500 years for my trouble, which taught me some manners I mostly ignore." He tilted his head. "So I'm not here to be impressed by you, and I'm not here to bow, but I am curious about you, genuinely, because a fellow doesn't build himself a shell that big, unless he's protecting something small and soft, and worth protecting, or unless he's rotten all the way through, and hiding it. The grin sharpened, just slightly, and under the warmth there was suddenly the faintest gleam of iron. And I mean to find out which. Sit down, talk to me, tell me. Did you send those white soldiers to kill a boy's grandmother on this road 2 nights ago, or was that somebody else's cruelty? And Ainz Ooal Gown, God King, terror of the New World, the loneliest man alive, stood frozen in the middle of the Katsa grasslands, staring down at a monkey who had seen straight through to the bottom of him, and realized that for the first time since he had come to this world, he had absolutely no idea what to say. Neither the god nor the salaryman had any script for being known. Ainz Ooal Gown had, over the months of his reign, developed a number of survival reflexes, and the strongest of them by far was this: when you do not know what to do the thing that reveals the least while sounding like the most. He fell back on it now, because the alternative was to keep standing frozen in a road while a monkey watched the god come apart at the seams. "You ask a great many questions of a stranger," said Mommon's warm voice, and to Ainz's private relief it came out level, even a little amused, the tone of an adventurer humoring an eccentric. "And you make a great many assumptions. I command no soldiers in white. The theocracy is no friend of mine." That much was even true. As for what I am, you claim to see through my shell. Perhaps you do. But seeing a thing and understanding it are not the same, monkey. You've looked at the outside of a book and told me its color. That is not the same as reading it. He was rather proud of that. It bought nothing and conceded nothing and sounded like the wisdom of ages. Sun Wukong laughed, a real laugh, delighted, throwing his head back. "Ha! Good, good. That's a good one. You've seen the cover, not the pages. I'm going to steal that." He wagged a finger. "But you're stalling, little king." That was a stall dressed up in a nice coat. I know a stall. I've told 1,000 of them. He patted the grass again. "You didn't answer the question. The grandmother, yes or no?" And there it was, laid down flat and simple in the road. And Ainz found, to his own surprise, that he wanted to answer it honestly. Not for strategy, just because a small, worn-down part of him, the part the monkey had already found and named, was tired of the mask and wanted, for one sentence, to tell the truth. "No," said Ainz. Quiet, flat, true. "That was not mine. I do not kill grandmothers on roads." A pause, and then, because the monkey's eyes were on him and he could not lie to them, something closer to the whole truth slipped out from behind the god. "I have done a great deal that this world would call monstrous. I will not pretend otherwise. You would see through the pretense. But I have never yet spent cruelty for its own sake. What I do to keep mine safe. That is all I have ever done. Keep mine safe." The monkey went quiet, studying him, and the studying had weight. "Keep mine safe," Sun Wukong repeated softly. "Yeah, I know that one. That's the one that lets you do almost anything, if you're not careful. I've watched a lot of gods start there and end up somewhere very ugly." He tilted his head. "But it's not nothing. That you didn't kill the boy's granny and won't take credit for it. Most tyrants would have claimed it just to seem scarier." A slow nod. "All right, you go in the maybe column. Congratulations. You've no idea how few make it to the maybe column." Ainz did not know whether to be relieved or insulted. He settled on wary. But something had gone wrong, or right, he could not tell which, in the fabric of his own head. Because standing there, having told one true thing and been believed, having been sorted with rough fairness into a column marked maybe instead of dead, Suzuki Satoru felt the old loneliness twist in him and reached toward this creature with a hunger that frightened him more than any world item. "This thing sees me," the loneliness whispered, "sees all of me, and didn't flinch, and is being fair. When did anyone last treat me as a thing to be judged fairly, rather than a god to be worshipped or a monster to be fled?" He wanted, horribly, to keep talking to it, to ask it where it had come from, and whether it too remembered another world, and whether it too was lonely. He was so busy fighting that hunger that he almost missed the far more dangerous thing happening at the edge of his awareness. Because 40 li away, Demiurge was watching this conversation through a remote mirror, and Demiurge, brilliant, devoted, wrong, had reached a terrible conclusion. Demiurge could not hear the words. The scrying gave him vision, but the audio at that range was a wash of wind. So Demiurge was reading the scene, and what the scene showed him was this. Lord Ainz, in the Momon guise, had gone alone to meet the unmeasurable rival, and the rival had walked straight up to him, unafraid, and sat down, and was now conducting what was plainly a negotiation between equals. And Lord Ainz was... Demiurge leaned very close to the mirror, and his blood ran cold. Lord Ainz was standing very still, frozen, rigid, in a posture that Demiurge, who had never once in his existence imagined his master afraid, could only interpret one way. Lord Ainz has been placed, however subtly, under threat, and is maintaining composure while a hostile power holds him in conversation, alone, with no support. The rival had gotten to Ainz alone. The rival was unmeasurable, and Lord Ainz had walked into it deliberately. Demiurge knew that. But Demiurge also knew, with the absolute certainty of the truly loyal, that his master's designs assumed a certain competence in his servants, and that the single most catastrophic failure imaginable would be for Nazarick to sit passively watching through a mirror, while the one irreplaceable being in all creation stood alone and cornered before a thing they could not gauge. He told us not to approach, Demiurge thought, agonized. But he told us that before we knew it would isolate him. Surely his design accounts for a contingency. Surely he would want us to be ready to move the instant the balance tips. To simply watch him be threatened and do nothing would be unthinkable. Demiurge did the most dangerous thing a brilliant and loyal servant can do. He decided, on his own initiative, to help. He would not disobey the letter of the order. No army, no banner. But a single test, a probe, something that would let Nazarick take the true measure of the thing while Lord Ainz kept it talking. Something deniable, something that could be dressed, if it went wrong, as a wild beast's aggression rather than Nazarick's hand. And Demiurge had, ready in the tomb, exactly the tool for a deniable lethal probe. A scroll, prepared long ago and never used, holding a single casting of one of the highest instant death effects in the tomb's arsenal. The kind of spell that, delivered from an unseen distance through a summoned proxy, would either kill the rival outright, revealing it to be measurable after all, or fail to kill it, revealing precisely what it was. He summoned a proxy, a high-level assassin servant, unmarked, untraceable to Nazarick. He handed it the scroll. He gave it a single instruction: approach the conversation unseen, and from concealment, deliver the death effect at the monkey. Not at Lord Ainz, never at Lord Ainz, at the unmeasurable thing sitting in the road. And he dispatched it, certain, utterly certain, that he was executing the unspoken contingency of his master's flawless plan. Sun Wukong felt it coming the way he felt everything coming. He was in the middle of asking the undead king a genuinely interesting question. So who did build you? A thing like you doesn't grow on a tree. Somebody made all that death and stitched it into a shape. When the fur on his neck stood up, and his ears caught the wrongness in the wind, the faint displacement of something moving toward them under a cloak of concealment, and behind that, worse, the gathering pressure of a spell, winding up to release. A killing spell. He knew the taste of those. He'd had a great many of them thrown at him. He did not stop talking. That was the thing about the Monkey King that his enemies never understood until far too late. He could do 6 things at once, and grin through all of them. So he kept asking his question, and let his voice run on easy and unbothered, and inwardly he plucked a single hair from the back of his neck, and he waited, curious, to see what this world's death actually did when it decided to kill. The spell released. It came out of the empty air to Wukong's flank, a lance of pure annihilating power, an instant death effect of a tier that had unmade adamantite adventurers and shattered the champions of nations. A spell that did not wound, but simply ended, reaching straight past armor and durability and hit points to seize the very life of whatever it touched and switch it off. It struck the Monkey King square in the chest. Ainz saw it hit. Ainz, who had not sent it, who had given no such order, who in that frozen instant recognized both the spell and, with a lurch of pure horror, whose it must be, saw one of his own tomb's death scrolls detonate against the chest of the being he had come to talk to, and thought, with perfect clarity, Demiurge. Oh no, Demiurge, what have you done? The spell hit Sun Wukong, and nothing happened. Not nothing in the sense of resisted, or endured, or shrugged off with a grunt of pain. Nothing in the sense of nothing. The killing effect that had ended kings washed over the Monkey King like a bucket of water thrown at a mountain, and found nothing to grip, nothing to switch off. Because you cannot end a life that has already been struck from the ledger of ending. You cannot delete a name that its owner deleted first, 900 years ago, standing in the offices of the 10 kings of hell, with a borrowed brush in his hand, and rage in his heart, scratching Sun Wukong out of the book of life and death so hard the paper tore. Death had no authority here. Death had signed away its claim, in ink, a very long time ago, and the Monkey King had the receipt. The spell guttered and died against him like a match in a gale. Sun Wukong finished his sentence. Because whoever it was, he said mildly, not even glancing at the annihilating power that had just failed to end him, did very good work. I'll give them that. And then he looked down at his own chest, at the fading nothing of the spell, and up into the empty air, where the concealed assassin hung frozen in dawning horror, and his molten eyes flared white gold, and his voice changed entirely. "Oh," said the great sage equal to heaven, and it was very soft, and it was the softest and most frightening thing Ainz had ever heard. "Oh, you tried to kill me, while I was talking. That's rude." The hair he had plucked was already in his fingers. He blew on it. Where there had been one monkey, there were suddenly a dozen, then 50, then 200, clones boiling into existence across the grasslands in every direction, each one identical, each one grinning, each one with the same white gold fire in its eyes, surrounding the concealed assassin and the frozen god in a widening ring of laughing, furious monkeys, and every single one of them reached up behind its ear and drew out a needle, and every single needle grew. Ainz Ooal Gown watched the instant death spell fail, watched 200 copies of an unkillable thing surround him, and understood two things with total clarity. The first was that Demiurge had just, out of pure love, done possibly the single most dangerous thing anyone in the New World had ever done. The second was that the maybe column had just closed, and everything now depended on the next 5 seconds, and on whether a god could apologize fast enough to a monkey who had just learned that Nazarick, whatever its king said with his mouth, tried to kill the things it could not understand. 5 seconds. Ainz Ooal Gown had built a reputation across an entire world on the strength of what he could do in 5 seconds, and almost none of it had been planned. It had all been panic wearing the mask of genius. He needed that particular alchemy now, more than he had ever needed it. 200 monkeys held 200 iron staves, and the staves were still growing. From needles to walking canes to war clubs to pillars, wood dark iron banded in gold, each one humming with a weight that made the air itself sag around it, and every molten eye in that ring had turned, not on the concealed assassin, but on him, on Momon, on the god in the shell, because the monkey had already worked out, in the half-second between the spell failing and the clones blooming, exactly where the death scroll had come from. There was only one death hill in this world. There was only one power that hoarded spells like that. And the undead king of that hill was sitting right here in the road, having just sworn he wasn't cruel, while his people put a killing spell in the Monkey King's chest mid-sentence. "So that's how it is," said the original Sun Wukong, and he was not grinning now. He rose smoothly to his feet, and his staff settled across his shoulders, and his voice had gone flat and cold and old. "You keep me talking, all soft and honest, maybe column. I only kill to keep mine safe. And meanwhile your death reaches around behind me to switch me off like a lamp. That's a good routine, little king." Truly, the two faces routine. I've had it played on me by better liars than you. The white gold fire in his eyes banked down into something worse, something quiet. I put you in the maybe column. I don't do that often. Feels bad to be wrong. Now, thought Suzuki Satoru. Now, right now, this instant, or everyone in 100 li dies and it starts with me. And he did the thing that no god does, the thing that was so far outside anything the New World had ever seen from Nazarick, that it would have stopped the Guardians' hearts if they'd had beating hearts to stop. He raised both gauntleted hands, palms open, and he said, fast, plain, stripped of every ounce of the resonant god voice, in something much closer to the flat, urgent register of a salaryman heading off a disaster. That wasn't me. I didn't order it. I don't want you dead. Stop, please. That spell was thrown against my orders, by someone who loves me too much and thinks too much and got it catastrophically wrong. And if you kill him for it, you'll be killing a servant for the crime of being loyal to an idiot. The idiot is me. Blame me, not him. The ring of monkeys stilled. Sun Wukong's head came up. He looked at Momon, at the small, frightened thing at the bottom of the shell, which he could see, which he had never stopped seeing. And for a long moment, the only sound on the Katse grasslands was the wind hissing through the flattened grass. Huh, said Wukong. He had heard a great many things from a great many powerful beings with weapons pointed at them. He had heard threats and boasts and bargains and pleas and lies of every color. He had never, not once in 900 years, heard a cornered god immediately throw himself in front of his own servant. Blame me, not him. Tyrants did not do that. Tyrants fed you their servants first, by the fistful, and kept themselves for last. The whole architecture of every throne he had ever climbed ran the other way. The small ones died for the big one. Always. That was what small ones were for. This one had just tried to die for a small one. Huh, said Wukong again, differently. He held up a hand. 200 monkeys lowered 200 staves. Not away, not gone, just down, held ready, a stay of execution, and not a pardon. He walked, the original, slow through his own ring of copies, up to the frozen concealed assassin, who still hung in the air trailing the dead vapor of its failed spell. And he looked at it, and he looked back at Momon, and he said, This one. This is the one who threw it? No, said Ainz. That one's a tool. The one who sent it isn't here. He's back at a hair's breadth pause, the god catching itself even now, even here, back home. He's my strategist, my best mind. He watched us talk through a far-seeing glass, and he saw me standing very still, and his whole devoted, brilliant, broken heart decided I must be in danger, and that watching me be in danger and doing nothing would be the worst failure of his life. So he disobeyed me by trying to protect me. With that, Ainz gestured at the fading spell. I am not defending it. It was reckless, and it was wrong, and it nearly started a war. I have spent this entire conversation trying to avoid, but I want you to understand what you'd be avenging yourself upon, if you go looking for him. Not malice, love, the stupid, dangerous, overthinking love of someone who would burn the world to keep me safe, and would never once understand why I wish he wouldn't. Wukong was silent a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, soft, tired, rueful, a laugh with a whole pilgrimage's worth of hard memory in it. Oh, him, he said. I know him. Not him. His type. He shook his head slowly. I had one of those. A soft, foolish, holy man I was sworn to guard, walked 10,000 li at his heel, and he loved me so wrong and so hard he put a torture ring on my head. This thing, he tapped the gold circlet at his brow, that squeezed my skull to pulp every time he thought I'd strayed. Out of love, he said. To keep me good, to keep me safe, in his way. The molten eyes went distant. Took me years to understand the loving and the hurting were the same hand. Took me longer to forgive it. I'm not sure I ever fully did. He looked back at Momon, and something in his face had shifted. Some door come open. So, your strategist loves you so much, he'd start a war behind your back, to save you from a danger you weren't even in, and you'd sooner take the blame for it yourself than let me lay a finger on him. A slow nod. Congratulations, little king. You just climbed out of the maybe column. Into what? Said Ainz warily. Don't know yet. New column. Never had one there before. Wukong turned and considered the frozen assassin, then flicked 2 fingers. Off you go. Tell your overthinking master he nearly got himself a very bad day, and that old monkey let him keep it, on account of his boss having a spine after all. The concealment servant fled. Wukong blew on his staff, and the clones burst back into 200 plucked hairs and drifted away on the wind, and then it was just the 2 of them again in the road, a monkey and a god, and the enormous ringing quiet of an atrocity that hadn't happened. 40 li away, Demiurge received his proxy's report and sat, for the first time in the entire history of his conscious existence, in a state that he could only distantly recognize as shame. The spell had failed. That was the smaller horror, profound, world-altering. The thing cannot be killed by our highest death magic, a fact that reordered every calculation about the new world, but a fact, at least, that a mind could hold and study. The larger horror was what the proxy had witnessed after. Lord Ainz, cornered, throwing up his hands. Lord Ainz pleading, and then the proxy's fragmentary sense of the words. That wasn't me. I didn't order it. Blame me, not him. And the monkey lowering its weapons, and Lord Ainz taking the blame. Ainz taking the blame for Demiurge's action, to Demiurge's intended victim. Demiurge had disobeyed his master. He had told himself he was executing the unspoken contingency of a flawless design, and he had been wrong, and worse than wrong. His master had had to demean himself, had had to beg, had had to strip off the god mask in front of a rival power, and cover for his servant's blunder with his own dignity, because the servant had loved him too clumsily to trust the design. And here was the thing that would have terrified Ainz most, had he known it. Demiurge, sitting in the cold blue scrying light and drowning in shame, did the only thing his devotion knew how to do with shame. He turned it, immediately, into deeper reverence. Because of course Lord Ainz had turned the disaster to account. Look, by taking the blame, by pleading, by appearing weak, his master had lowered the rival's guard, had extracted the rival from a killing rage, had moved it from hostility toward, the mirror showed it, something almost like rapport. Demiurge had thrown a wrench into the machine, and Lord Ainz had, in the space of 5 seconds, caught the wrench and made it a key. I failed him, Demiurge thought, and he transmuted my failure into progress before it had finished happening. I will never be worthy. I will spend eternity trying to be worthy. And, kneeling alone in the empty scrying chamber, he swore a private and fervent oath never again to presume upon the design, an oath he would keep for perhaps a week. He did not report the failure to the other guardians. Not yet. He told himself it was to spare Lord Ainz the disruption. It was, in truth, because some new and unfamiliar thing in him could not yet bear to say aloud, I acted without orders, and I was wrong, and our Lord paid for it. Back in the road, Sun Wukong sat down again, properly this time, comfortably, as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened, and patted the grass beside him a third time, and this time, slowly, warily, feeling every one of his 41 banners worth of dread. Ainz Ooal Gown lowered the towering black-armored bulk of Momon down into the grass and sat. Right, said the Monkey King, folding his hands. His eyes had warmed back to gold, and the grin was creeping in at the corners again, and something between them had changed in a way neither of them could name yet. Now, you just did something no king I've ever met would have done, and it's cost you your whole scary act, so we might as well be honest with each other from here. I'm Sun Wukong, great sage equal to heaven, fell out of my sky into yours by accident, chasing a fox. And I think, he looked the god up and down, kind and shrewd and unafraid, I think you and I are the two loneliest things in this entire world, and I think we both know it, and I think that's a far more interesting fact about us than which of us could beat the other. The grin arrived in full. So, little king, what do people call you when you're not hiding in a shell 3 sizes too big? And Ainz Ooal Gown, who had not spoken his true name to another living soul since the world had changed, who had wanted, from the first moment those molten eyes saw through him, exactly this, and been too afraid to reach for it, sat in the long grass beside the Monkey King, and felt the mask come loose, and heard himself begin, very quietly, to answer. He did not give the monkey everything. He was still Ainz Ooal Gown. Some walls do not come down even when a thing has already climbed over them. But he gave more than he had given anyone in this world, and the giving was terrifying, and it was the closest thing to relief he had felt in months. He told the monkey that he had been a man, once, in a world that no longer existed to him, a small, tired man with a small, tired life, who had played inside a beautiful made place with friends, and had loved that place because it was the only place that had ever kept a light on for him. He told him that the friends had gone, one by one, back to their small, tired lives, until only he remained, alone in the beautiful made place on its last night, and that then the world had changed, and the made place had become real, and the friends' creations, the guardians, the servants, the whole vast devoted tomb of them, had woken up alive and turned to him with love in their eyes and called him God. "And you can't tell them," said Sun Wukong. It wasn't a question. "No. Can't tell them you're just a fellow doing his best. Can't tell them you're frightened, or lost, or making it up as you go. Because the day they stop believing you're a god is the day something in them might decide to stop taking orders from a fraud," said Ainz. "Or worse, is the day they'd look at me and see what I actually am, and be disappointed, and I would rather," the god's flat voice caught, just slightly, "I would rather be worshipped by beings I can't talk to, than lose the last people in any world who waited for me." The monkey was quiet a while. "That's a prison, little king," he said at last, gently. "A gold one. Roomiest cell I ever saw. But it's a cell, and you built it, and you're the jailer and the prisoner both." He plucked a stem of grass and chewed it, thoughtful. "I spent 500 years under a mountain for thinking I was bigger than I was. You've spent, how long? Under a crown, for the same crime turned inside out, thinking you have to be bigger than you are, forever, for everyone, with no rest. I'm not sure which of us got the worst sentence." They sat with that. Two of the loneliest things in the world, in a road, in the grass, while 41 banners worth of empire held its breath 40 li away. And then, because the universe has never once let Sun Wukong sit peacefully for more than a quarter of an hour, the sky to the northeast filled with wings. She had not been ordered to come. Albedo had watched, through the throne room mirror that Ainz did not know relayed to the overseer's private chambers, the whole of it, her lord going alone to the rival sitting down with him as though they were equals, as though her lord were merely a man. And then, an hour ago, the assassin, the failed spell, the thing she could not fully hear but could read in her lord's frozen posture and raised hands. She did not know it had been Demiurge's doing. She knew only what her eyes told her, that her god had gone out alone, and that a thing had tried to kill him, and that now he sat in the grass beside it. And to Albedo's absolute and unconditional love, this was not rapport, this was not diplomacy, this was her lord in the jaws of something that had already tried once to end him, and had failed only by some miracle, and every second he spent within its reach was a second she could not, would not, endure. Ainz had said no one goes to it. Albedo had decided that Ainz, in his infinite wisdom, could not possibly have meant, let it sit beside you unopposed, after it survives our deadliest spell. She had decided her lord's true will, the will beneath the words, cried out for a guardian at his side. She had decided, as Demiurge had decided, as love in Nazarick always decided, that the order was a cage and the devotion was the truth, and that she would rather be punished for saving him than obedient while he died. So Albedo came, winged, armored in black and white, the overseer of the floor guardians, level 100, wielding a war axe that could cleave a hillside. She came down out of the northeastern sky like a falling star with murder in her golden eyes. And she came fast, and she did not slow, and she aimed the whole screaming dive of herself at the small golden-furred thing sitting beside her lord. "Away from him!" Ainz was on his feet in an instant, one gauntleted hand flung up, the god voice cracking out of him in raw alarm. "Albedo, stop. That is an order. Stand down." But she was diving at the speed of devotion, which is faster than sound and much faster than obedience, and the axe was already falling, and there was no version of the next half-second in which it did not land. Sun Wukong sighed. He did not get up in a hurry. He had been getting jumped by furious, powerful things for the better part of 1,000 years, and he had long ago stopped finding it exciting. He simply turned, from where he sat, and caught the falling axe. He caught it in 2 fingers. The axe of the overseer of the floor guardians, driven down with the full 100-level strength of a diving Albedo, an impact that would have split the earth, stopped dead between the Monkey King's index finger and thumb with a sound like a struck bell, and did not move another inch. Albedo hung above him, wings hammering, both hands white-knuckled on the haft, pouring every ounce of her monstrous strength into a weapon that had simply, gently, stopped, held between 2 casual fingers by a creature who had not even bothered to stand up. "Hello," said Sun Wukong pleasantly, looking up at her. You must be the strategist's opposite number, the love that hits first and thinks never. He clicked his tongue. Your king just told me not to hurt his people. Third time in one afternoon, I've had one of you throw yourself at me over that man. He's very loved, isn't he? Loved half to death. Literally, in my case. Albedo snarled and wrenched at the axe. It did not budge. She might as well have been trying to pull a mountain out of the earth by hand. Let me explain something to you. Since your king can't, on account of you not letting him get a word in. Wukong's voice stayed light, but under it the iron gleamed again, and his molten eyes held hers, and there was in them the flat, immovable authority of a thing that had fought heaven's entire host to a standstill, and lost only to the Buddha himself. I could have killed him. Any second of the last hour, I could have. Your deadliest death spell touched me and died. Go on. Feel free to be horrified. Everyone else was. If I wanted your king dead, he would be a memory. He is not dead. He is not dead because I chose it, and because he did something in the last hour that made me want to choose it. So when you dive out of the sky screaming to save him from me, he flicked the 2 fingers, and the axe, and Albedo attached to it, were flung back and up a full 30 feet to hang startled in the air. You are not saving him from anything. You are interrupting the one conversation this poor lonely fellow has had in months. Sit down, Raven Girl. Nobody here is his enemy, yet. Ainz found his voice. Albedo, flat, final. The god mask slammed back into place because he needed it. Needed every scrap of the terrible authority. Because this was the knife edge. One wrong move, and the monkey's patience ended, and Nazarick lost its overseer in a single afternoon. Down now beside me. That is not a request, and it is not for discussion, and if you love me at all, you will obey me this instant. Albedo, quivering, torn between 2 absolutes, obeyed the one with the crown. She descended. She landed. She stood rigid at her lord's side, wings mantled, golden eyes locked on the Monkey King with a hatred so pure it had its own gravity, and she said, low and shaking, "It survived Nazarick's death magic. My lord, it survived our death magic. Do you understand what that?" "I understand it far better than you do," said Ainz, "because I was here, and I have spent this hour learning what it is, while you were deciding to disobey me. Yes, it cannot be killed by our death effects. It cannot be killed, I begin to suspect, by a great many things. Which is precisely why the only sane course available to Nazarick is the one I chose an hour ago, and the one you and Demiurge have now both nearly wrecked. Talk to it. Learn it. Do not, under any circumstances, throw the deadliest servants I have at a thing our deadliest weapons cannot scratch." The red points of his eyes burned. "Tell me, Albedo, if your axe had landed, if it had done what you meant it to do, what do you imagine would have happened next? To you, to me, to everyone within 100 li, when it stood up unharmed and angry?" Albedo had no answer. For the first time, looking at the 2 fingers that had caught her axe, at the 30-foot toss that had cost the creature no effort at all, she began, dimly, against the whole grain of her devotion, to understand the size of the thing she had attacked, and the size of the mercy that had let her land unbroken. "He's not wrong, you know," offered Sun Wukong helpfully. "Smart king, frightened, but smart. You should listen to him more and dive at things less." "Be silent," Albedo hissed at him, and then, horrified at having spoken so to a thing that had bested her, flinched. Wukong only laughed. "There it is. There's the fire. Good, you'll need it." He rose, finally, unhurried, dusting grass from his coat, and looked between the 2 of them, the towering god and the trembling furious overseer, and his face settled into something thoughtful and a little sad. "3 of your people have now come at me sideways to save you, little king, and every one of them did it because they love you and don't trust the world not to take you. That's not a weakness. That's the best thing about your whole cold empire, honestly. But it's going to get one of them killed, not by me. I've made my choice. By the next thing. And there's always a next thing. Trust me. I've met all of them." He looked at Ainz, and his voice gentled. "You can't keep them safe by being big enough. Nobody's big enough forever. Even me. I learned that under the mountain." A pause. "Someday something's going to come at this world that even you can't out-terrify. And on that day you're going to wish you'd spent less time being worshipped and more time being known. By them, and by whatever friends you were too proud and too frightened to make. And far to the south, at that very hour, in the white marble halls of the slain theocracy, a council of grim old men in gold-trimmed robes was bent over reports of a monster fallen from the sky on the Katsa plains, a monster that flew on clouds, that grieved over dead heretics as though vermin had souls. That had been seen consorting with the undead sorcerer thing of the Death Hill, and the eldest of them was reaching, with a trembling reverent hand, for the key to the vault where the theocracy kept the weapons of the age of the gods. The next thing was already coming. The slain theocracy did not fear death. Death was an old companion, an instrument, a tithe paid and collected across 6 centuries of holy war. What the theocracy feared was the return of the demon gods, the old apocalyptic powers of legend, against whom the 6 great gods had descended in the first place, to shepherd humanity through the dark. Every doctrine, every atrocity, every white and gold soldier clearing peasants off a road, all of it flowed from a single terror handed down through 600 years. The strong will come again from outside the world, and if humanity is not stronger, humanity will end. And now the reports agreed, and the reports were nightmares. A being had fallen from the sky. It flew. It could not be measured. It had walked, openly, on the Katsa plains beside the undead abomination of the northeast that the theocracy had been watching with sick dread for months, and the two of them had sat down together in a road like old friends. To the grim council in their white marble hall, this was not 2 lonely things finding each other. This was the beginning of the prophecy. 2 demon powers, converging, allying, on the very doorstep of humanity's last true faith. They would not wait to see it bloom. The cardinals went down into the vault beneath the cathedral, the vault none but the Council of 6 ever entered, and they brought up the thing that had been kept there since the age of the gods, sealed and starved and prayed over, fed only in the direst extremity. They brought up the Black Scripture's holy relic of last resort, a world item. The New World did not know it held such things. Even Nazarick did not know how many still lay hidden across it. But they were there, reality-warping artifacts of the vanished gods, each one a trump card that could override even the highest defenses of the age, the true apex weapons of the setting, so far above ordinary magic that they operated by different laws entirely. And the theocracy, alone among the New World's powers, had guarded one for 600 years against exactly this, the day a demon god walked the earth and had to be unmade. They called it the Cage of Downfall. It did not kill. Killing was beneath it. Killing could be resisted, endured, undone. The cage did something older and worse. It severed. It reached past a being's body, to the source of what made that being's power theirs, the covenant, the pact, the cosmic exception that lifted them above the natural order, and it cut the thread. A world item's authority overrode the authority of a lesser god's exemption, and Sun Wukong's whole invulnerability, his layered deathlessness, his diamond body and struck-out name, rested on exactly such an exemption, a covenant with his own cosmos, with his heaven, his book of life and death, his furnace and peaches and pills, his own cosmos, which was no longer here. That was the flaw. That was the crack the cage was built to find. In his own world, his deathlessness was law, backed by the full authority of a heaven that had ratified it. In this world, that authority was not gone, never gone, but unwitnessed, uncertified, a claim held by a foreign creature whose home, heaven, did not extend its writ here. He was a king carrying his crown into a country that had never heard of his kingdom. Everywhere he had gone in the New World, that had not mattered, because nothing here had the standing to challenge his claim. Nothing here outranked his home cosmos's word, except a world item, which did not challenge the claim. It simply had the authority to ignore it. They found him at dusk, 3 days later. He had not gone back to the Death Hill with the king. That would come, both of them knew, some other day, some other conversation. But neither had he left. He lingered on the Katsa plains, drifting between the villages, a monkey on a cloud who mended a broken well here and drove off a pack of wilderness ghouls there, and told outrageous stories to wide-eyed children in the evenings, and slowly, without meaning to, became something the frightened peasants of that hard country had never had before, a thing above them that was on their side. Word spread. In 3 days the Monkey King had become to the small folk of the Katsa Plains, the first good rumor of their whole lives. Which was, of course, exactly what made the theocracy certain he was a demon god. Nothing frightens a faith built on fear, like a power the powerless start to love. The Black Scripture came at dusk, the theocracy's most elite killers, the ones who wielded the relics of the gods, and they came in force. And in their center 4 of them bore the cage of downfall on a bier of white gold, chanting, feeding it the last of the vault's stored prayers. Sun Wukong felt them coming from a li off, felt the wrongness of the thing they carried the way he'd felt the wrongness of the wind on the night he fell, and he set down the child he'd been carrying on his shoulders and told the villagers, quietly, to get indoors and stay there, and walked out alone into the emptied square to meet them. "You've the smell of the vault thing about you," he called to them, easy, hands loose. "Whatever's in that box you're all so proud of. I can feel it from here. Feels old. Older than your 6 gods, I'd wager, whatever they are." He tilted his head. "You've come to kill me, obviously. Everyone does, eventually. But I'll give you the courtesy nobody ever gives me. I'll tell you plainly, it won't work, and offer you the chance to turn around and go home to your families with all your limbs. I've killed enough for one lifetime. I'd honestly rather not." The commander of the Black Scripture raised a hand and did not answer, and the 4 bearers set down the bier and opened the cage of downfall. There was no light. There was no sound. There was only, suddenly, a pressure, a vast, indifferent authority unfolding out of the box, ancient and absolute and utterly unlike any spell, a thing that did not attack Sun Wukong so much as it looked at him the way a magistrate looks at a forged deed. It reached past his diamond skin, past his golden furnace-baked flesh, past the layered pills and peaches of his deathlessness, past all of it, down to the root, to the covenant, to the struck-out name, and it examined the claim, and it found the claim's authority to be from a heaven not present, and it ruled, with the flat cosmic finality of a world item, insufficient. And it cut. Sun Wukong screamed. He had not screamed in 900 years. Not under the mountain. He had raged under the mountain, but he had not screamed. Not in the furnace. He had cursed in the furnace, but he had not screamed. He screamed now, because the cage of downfall did what nothing in his own cosmos had ever had the authority to do. It severed his exemption from death, and for the first time since he had scratched his name out of the ledger with a borrowed brush, Sun Wukong felt the cold shadow of an ending fall across him. His invulnerability guttered. The struck-out name flickered back into legibility. The diamond body remembered how to bruise. He dropped to one knee in the square, gasping, and where the Black Scripture's blades bit at him now, and they came at once, all of them, the age's deadliest killers falling on a suddenly mortal demon god, the blades bit. Drew blood, golden blood, immortal blood, but blood, flowing, where for 9 centuries nothing had drawn any at all. So this is the receipt getting torn up, some distant clear part of him thought, even through the agony. Should have known. Everything that's given can be taken, even old monkey, even this. He was still the strongest thing on that square by an enormous margin, severed exemption or no. His strength was his own. His skill was 900 years deep, and the Ruyi Jingu Bang did not care one whit about covenants. He came up off his knee with a roar, and the staff swept out, and 3 of the Black Scripture simply ended, smashed across the square like dolls. But he was bleeding now. He could be worn down now, and the cage of downfall sat open on its bier, radiating its indifferent authority, holding his deathlessness severed for as long as it stayed open, and the Black Scripture had numbers, and relics of their own, and 600 years of practice killing things that had thought themselves unkillable. For the first time in the New World, the Monkey King was in genuine danger of dying, and 40 li away, in the throne room of a tomb that should not exist, an undead king watching through a scrying mirror rose slowly to his feet. Ainz Ooal Gown had told himself he was merely observing. He had told himself that if the theocracy and the monkey destroyed each other, it solved his single largest problem and cost Nazarick nothing. He had told himself coldly, correctly, in the language of the god he was supposed to be, that the strategically optimal move was to watch 2 threats annihilate one another and inherit the wreckage. He watched the cage of downfall open. He watched the monkey scream and bleed. He watched the one being in this world who had looked straight through him and, instead of fleeing or worshipping, had sat down beside him in the grass and called him Little King, and been fair to him. He watched that being brought to its knees, bleeding gold, alone in a village square, dying for the crime of being kind to peasants the theocracy considered vermin. And Suzuki Satoru, inside the god, discovered that he did not care in the slightest what the strategically optimal move was. "Albedo," he said, and his voice was not the flat weaponized calm of the throne room. It shook. It shook with something the whole of Nazarick had never once heard from its god. "Assemble the guardians, all of them, full battle. We deploy to the Katsa plains at once." Albedo was at his side in an instant, alarmed, uncomprehending. "My lord, the monkey, you would spend Nazarick's strength to save the thing that survived our death magic? It is nothing to us. Let the theocracy and the demon destroy each." "It is not nothing to me," said Ainz Ooal Gown, and the mask cracked, and for one naked instant, the loneliest man in any world looked out through the eye-holes of his god at the overseer who loved him and could not understand him, and told her the truest thing he had said in months. "It saw me, Albedo. It saw all the way down to the bottom of me, and it did not run, and it did not kneel, and it did not laugh. It was kind to me. Do you understand how long it has been?" The voice broke, and he let it. For once he let it. Since anyone was simply kind to me, and asked nothing, and wanted nothing, and saw. Albedo had no answer. She had never seen her god like this. None of them had. "I have spent this whole world being worshipped," said Ainz, and turned, and dark power boiled up around him, as 41 banners caught a wind that came from nowhere. The monkey was right. I would rather have one friend who knows what I am than 1,000 subjects who kneel to what I'm not, and someone is trying to kill the only one I found. The red lights of his eyes blazed like twin furnaces. "Assemble the guardians. We march." For the first time since he came to the New World, the Great Tomb of Nazarick emptied itself for war, not for conquest, not for supremacy, not for the honor of vanished gods, for a friend. The Black Scripture had killed demon gods before. It was, in the end, the only thing they had ever truly been for. 600 years of doctrine and cruelty and hoarded relics, all of it sharpened to a single edge for this exact hour. The hour a thing from outside the world walked the earth and had to be sent back into whatever dark had birthed it. They fought well. They fought as men fight who believe, past all doubt, that the survival of their whole species rests on their blades tonight. And with the cage of downfall open on its bier, holding the Monkey King's deathlessness severed, they had, for the first time in their long murderous history, a genuine chance of winning. Sun Wukong made them pay for every inch of it. He was bleeding, and he could die, and he had not been either of those things in 900 years, and it turned out that 900 years of invulnerability had not made him soft, because before the invulnerability, there had been 500 years of being a mortal stone monkey, learning to fight with nothing but his own 2 hands and a stolen staff. And that monkey remembered how to bleed and win anyway. The Rui Jingu Bang did not care about the cage. The staff had never derived its authority from his deathlessness. It derived its authority from being a pillar that once held up the sea, and it swung now through the Black Scripture's elite like a mountain falling sideways. And where it touched, relics of the age of the gods shattered, and their wielders with them. But there were so many, and they had relics that did not care about strength, chains that bound, seals that slowed, a spear that drank the speed from the air around it. And every time he gathered himself to reach the cage, to close the wretched box and take back his deathlessness, 3 of them threw their lives across his path to stop him, buying with their own bodies the seconds the cage needed to keep cutting. They knew what the cage was worth. They spent themselves like coins to keep it open. He was slowing. Golden blood ran down his arm and made the staff slick in his grip. A seal relic had caught his left leg, and it dragged now, half dead. He had killed a dozen of the age's finest, and there were still more, and the cage still yawned. And for the first time, the clear, distant part of him that had thought so, this is the receipt getting torn up, began, very quietly, to think, this might actually be the end of you, old monkey. After everything. A box in a foreign world. Well, you always did wonder how it had finally happened. And then the sky to the northeast filled, again, with wings. But this time it was not one furious overseer diving alone. This time it was all of them. They came down on the village square like the end of the world, because that is precisely what the Guardians of Nazarick were built to be. Aura and Mare came first and fastest, the dark elf twins. Aura's beasts pouring across the ground ahead of her in a howling tide, Mare's staff already rising, the earth itself heaving up at his shy murmured word, to swallow a whole rank of the black scripture, before they knew the sky had changed. Cocytus fell from the air like a glacier calving, his 4 blades already moving, frost blooming in a white shockwave where he landed that flash froze the fountain in the square's center to solid ice. The great insectoid warrior waded into the theocracy's elite, with the terrible unhurried certainty of a thing that had never once in its existence met its match. And where he passed, men became statues of frost, and then became nothing. Shaltir laughed her dead doll laugh and was suddenly among them in a spray of red, the little vampire a blur too fast for mortal eyes, feeding as she killed. Demiurge, who had sworn a private oath a week ago and broken it the instant his lord commanded war, walked into the carnage smiling his eternal pleasant smile, and simply unmade everything his gaze fell upon. Hellfire and worse. A demon architect let off the leash at last. And above them all, descending slow and terrible, with 41 banners streaming from nowhere, and Albedo at his right hand, and dark power boiling off him in a column that turned the dusk to midnight, came Ainz Ooal Gown, and the New World's second greatest terror looked down upon the slain theocracy's holy killers, and spoke a single word of high magic, and a swathe of the square simply ceased. The black scripture, for the first time in 600 years, understood what it was to be the vermin. Son Wukong, on one knee, bleeding gold, staff planted in the frozen earth to hold himself upright, watched the god-king of the Death Hill descend out of the black sky to save him, and he began, helplessly, incongruously, gasping, to laugh. "You came," he wheezed, as Ainz touched down before him, and the guardians rolled the theocracy's elite up like a carpet all around them. "You cold, frightened, magnificent. You came for a monkey, after all that talk about keeping only yours safe." "Be quiet," said Ainz, and his flat voice was not quite steady, and the mask was not quite on, and he knelt. The god-king of Nazarick knelt, in the bloody frozen mud beside a wounded monkey, where all his guardians could see, and looked at the golden blood, at the flickering struck-out name, at the severed exemption, and understood in an instant what the theocracy had done. His red eyes turned to the cage of downfall, open on its bier, radiating its indifferent ancient authority. The box. It's the box, isn't it? It's doing this to you. "World item," Wukong got out. "Or near enough. Cuts a fellow off from what makes him himself, from his home's word. And my home's a long way from here, little king. Nothing to back my claim." A bloody grin. "Turns out even old monkey runs on someone's say-so, when it comes down to it. Who knew?" Ainz Ooal Gown looked at the cage of downfall. A world item. The one class of thing in all creation he most coveted and most feared. The true trump cards of this world. And here was one sitting open in the mud in front of him. And the god in him wanted it. Wanted it with a desperate hoarding hunger. Because a world item in Nazarick's vault was survival. Was insurance. Was one more wall between his people and the dark. And Suzuki Satoru looked at the box that was killing his friend, and did not hesitate for even the length of a breath. "Albedo, Demiurge, take that thing and close it, now." They did not question it. They had stopped questioning anything their lord did tonight. They were far past the edge of anything they understood, watching their cold and distant god kneel weeping close in the mud beside a monkey. Demiurge reached the bier in a stride and brought his clawed hands down on the lid of the cage of downfall, and the world item fought him. A world item does not close easily, its authority pushing back against even a floor guardian. But Albedo's hands closed over Demiurge's, and the two most powerful guardians in Nazarick forced the ancient box shut against the will of a dead god's relic, and the lid came down, and the indifferent pressure snuffed out like a candle. And Sun Wukong's deathlessness came back. It flooded into him all at once, the covenant reknitting, the struck-out name scratching itself out of legibility again, the diamond body remembering itself, and the golden blood stopped, and the wounds closed, and the half-dead leg came back to life, and the great sage equal to heaven rose to his feet, in the frozen bloody square with the light pouring back into his molten eyes, whole, and unkillable, and furious. The remaining black scripture looked at a demon god restored, and a full deployment of Nazarick around it, and finally, far too late, understood. It did not take long after that. When it was over, when the square was still, and the last of the theocracy's finest were frost and ash and worse, and the cage of downfall sat closed and captured in Demiurge's careful hands, the monkey and the god stood facing each other in the ruin, and neither of them said anything for a while. "You closed it," Wukong said at last. "The box. You had a world item, open, right there in front of you, yours for the taking. I felt how much you wanted it. Don't lie, I saw it. I see everything, remember. And you told them to close it, and give me back my life, instead of taking it for your vault." He shook his head slowly, wonderingly. "Little king, do you have any idea how rare you are? A god who'd give up a trump card to save a friend? I've known the whole host of heaven, and I could count the ones who'd do that on the fingers of one hand, and have fingers left over." "I have the box," said Ainz, with a flicker of the old dryness. "Closed. In my vault. I'm not that selfless." But the joke was thin, and they both let it be thin, and under it, the true thing sat plain between them. "You knelt in the mud for me," said Wukong quietly, "in front of all of them. Let them see you do it. Let them see you weren't what you pretend to be. That under the god, there's a fellow who'd throw his dignity in the dirt for someone he'd known 3 days. He glanced at the guardians, at Albedo, at Demiurge, at all of them, standing in the wreckage watching their lord with expressions none of them had ever worn before. Something cracked open and remade in every devoted face. And you know what? Look at them. Look. They didn't think less of you for it. They love you more. You've been so frightened for so long that the day they saw the small soft thing inside the shell would be the day they left you, and instead they just watched you kneel for a monkey, and every one of them would follow you off the edge of the world twice as hard now." He grinned, tired and gold and enormous. "Turns out being known isn't the end of being loved, little king. Sometimes it's the whole start of it." Ainz Ooal Gown looked at his guardians, and his guardians looked back at him, not at a god, not at a mask, but at him, the whole of him, the terror and the salaryman, and the loneliness, and the kneeling, and did not turn away, and did not love him less. And Suzuki Satoru, standing in a frozen bloody square at the far edge of a world that was not his own, felt something in him that had been clenched shut for months, for years, for his whole small tired life, finally, slowly, begin to open. "Thank you," said Ainz Ooal Gown, to the Monkey King, and meant it all the way down to the bottom of the shell. They stood together on the northern rampart of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, the monkey and the king, and below them the newly forged wards of the Death Hill glimmered out across the Katsa Plains toward a dawn that neither of them had slept to earn. Sun Wukong had come to Nazarick, in the end. Not as a conquest and not as a captive. As a guest, the first true guest the tomb had ever held, walking its Gothic halls with his hands behind his back and his molten eyes drinking in the vast, strange beauty of a dead man's love made real. He had met them all properly. He had let Aura's beasts sniff him and pronounced them excellent. He had lost a staring contest to Cocytus on purpose and declared Frost Honor satisfied. He had told Shaltir a ghost story that actually frightened her, which no one had thought possible, and had spent a full hour with the twins simply being climbed on, because some things are the same in every world, and small shy children who have never been allowed to be children will always, eventually, climb a monkey. And he had sat a long while with Demiurge, the two of them, the loyal architect and the thing that had survived his death spell, and whatever passed between them, Demiurge came away from it changed, quieter, his eternal smile gone thoughtful, for the monkey had said to him, gently, the one thing no one in Nazarick had ever dared say, "You love him so much you keep trying to be his mind for him. Try, once, just being his friend instead. It's harder, it's better. He needs the second one more." Now dawn came up gold over the plains, and the Monkey King's cloud drifted at the foot of the rampart, patient, waiting to carry him wherever he chose to go. "You don't have to leave," said Ainz. It came out before he could stop it, before the god could edit it, and he did not take it back. "There's a place here. There will always be a place here. You could stay." "I know," Wukong smiled. and there was no cruelty in it at all, only a great and ancient kindness. And it's the best offer I've had in 500 years. And don't think I don't know it. But little king, he looked out over the plains, over the villages waking in the gold light, over the whole hard heavenless world. This world hasn't got a sky, you know that? Not really. Lots of power, top to bottom, biggest fish and smallest fish, but nothing over it. Nobody up top who cares whether a grandmother dies with the reins in her fist. I felt it the first night. It's the loneliest thing about this place. His molten eyes came back to Ainz, warm and steady. A world like that needs something walking around in it that the small ones can look up to. Something that shows up when the white soldiers come. Something that's on their side just because it's the right thing and for no other reason. The grin arrived, wide and gold and free. Sounds like a job for a monkey, doesn't it? I've had worse ones. Guarded a whining monk across 10,000 li once. This'll be a holiday next to that. You'll be alone out there, said Ainz quietly. So will you. In here. Some nights, no matter how many of them love you. Wukong shrugged. But here's the thing about you and me now, little king. We're not strangers alone anymore. We're two lonely things that found each other, once, in a road, in the grass. That doesn't come apart just because I go for a walk. He stepped up onto the rampart's edge, one foot on his waiting cloud, and looked back. I'll come round, when the white soldiers get too bold, or when something falls out of your sky that even you can't out-terrify. And something will, they always do. You send up a flare, and old monkey comes. That's a promise, and I don't make many, and I've never once broken one I made. His face gentled, and in the meantime, you do the thing I told you. You let them know you, all the way down. You've seen now it doesn't cost you their love. It's the only thing that ever earns the real kind. Stop being their god, little king. Start being their friend. You'll be astonished what it does for the loneliness. Ainz Ooal Gown stood on the rampart of his impossible tomb and looked at the only being in any world who had ever seen straight through to the bottom of him and stayed, and found he could not speak. So he did the other thing. He reached up, slowly, and he took off the helm. Not the Momon helm, there was no Momon here, but the idea of the helm, the god mask, the thing he wore even when he wore nothing at all. He let the monkey see the small tired man one last time, plainly, unguarded, in the gold dawn, and he inclined his crowned skull, the god king of Nazarick, in a bow he had given no one and nothing since the world had changed. A bow between equals, between friends. Safe roads, son Wukong, said Suzuki Satoru. Warm halls, little king, said the great sage equal to heaven. And the somersault cloud leapt up off the rampart with a laughing monkey aboard it. 108,000 li in a single bound. Out over the waking plains and the villages, and the whole hard heavenless world that had, without quite noticing, just been given a sky. Behind him, on the rampart, the god king of Nazarick watched him go until he was a golden speck, and then nothing at all. And then Ainz Ooal Gown turned, and found his guardians gathered behind him in the dawn, all of them, come up quietly to see the guest depart, watching their lord with those new remade faces, waiting. He looked at them a long moment, and then, for the first time since the world began again, the god king of Nazarick did not put the mask back on. Come, he said, and his flat cold voice had something almost warm in it, something that would take them all a while to get used to, and a while longer to love even more than they already did. Walk with me. There are things I have never told any of you, about who I was, about who I am. A pause, and then, wonderingly, as if hearing the words from very far away, I think it's time you knew me. And Nazarick's 41 banners stirred in a dawn wind that, for once, carried no dread at all. Far to the south, in the white marble halls of the slain theocracy, a shattered council counted its dead and understood that the two demon powers of the northeast had not, after all, destroyed each other, that they had instead become friends, and that the age of the gods' one great trump card was gone into the vault of the Death Hill, and that the small folk of the Katsa Plains had begun, quietly, in defiance of 600 years of doctrine, to whisper a new and terrible heresy to one another in the dark, that there was something walking the world now that came when you called, and stood between you and the white soldiers, and asked for nothing, The theocracy did not know its name. They would learn it. And on a cloud 100 lad up, riding the gold morning toward the next village that needed a monkey. The great sage equal to heaven laughed into the wind for the sheer joy of a world with something to do in it. And behind him, deep beneath a hill that should not exist, a lonely god sat down among his friends at last, and began, in a low, unhurried voice, to tell them the truth.